Chapter 3. The Sailing of the King. What made Scrub look so dingy, and Jill too, as she could only have seen herself, was the splendor of their surroundings. I had better describe them at once. Though a cleft in those mountains which Jill had seen far inland as she approached the land, the sunset light was pouring over a level lawn. On the far side of the lawn, its weather vanes glittering in the light, rose a many turreted castle. The most beautiful castle Jill had ever seen. On the near side was a quay of white marble, and moored I'm getting lost. Moored to this. That doesn't make sense. Okay, whatever. The ship, a tall ship with high forecastle and high hoop, glided in crimson, with a great flag at the masthead, and many banners waving from the decks, and a row of shields bright as silver along the bulwarks. The gangplank was laid to her, and at the foot of it, just ready to go on board, stood an old man. He wore a rich mantle of scarlet, which opened in front to show his silver mail shirt. There was a thin circlet of gold on his head. His beard, white as wool, fell nearly to his waist. He stood straight enough, leaning one hand on the shoulder of the richly dressed lord, who seemed younger than himself, but you could see he was very old and frail. He looked as if he was a puff of wind which could blow him away, and his eyes were watery. Immediately in front of the king, who had turned round to speak to his people before going on board the ship, there was a little chair on wheels, and harnessed to it the little donkey, not much bigger than a big retriever. In this chair sat a fat little dwarf. He was as richly dressed as the king, but because of his fatness, and because he was sitting hunched in among the cushions, the effect was quite different. It made him look like a shapeless little bundle of fur and silk and velvet. He was as old as the king, but more hale and hearty, and very keen eyes. His bare head, which was bald and extremely large, shone like a gigantic billiard ball in the sunset light. Further back, in a half circle, stood what Jill at once knew to be courtiers. They were well worth looking at for their clothes and armor alone. As far as that went, they looked more like a flower bed than a crowd. But really, what made Jill open her eyes and mouth as wide as they would go was the people themselves, if people was the right word. For only about 1 in every 5 was human. The rest were things you never see in our world: fauns, satyrs, and centaurs. Jill could give a name to these, for she had seen pictures of them. Dwarves, too, and there were a lot of animals she knew as well: bears and badgers, moles, leopards, mice, and various birds. But then they were so very different from the animals which one called by the same names in England. Some of them were much bigger. The mice, for instance, stood on their hind legs and were over 2 feet high. But quite apart from that, they all looked different. You could see by the expression on their faces that they could talk and think and just as well as you could. Golly, thought Jill, so it's true after all. But next moment she added, I wonder, are they friendly? For she had noticed, on the outskirts of the crowd, 1 or 2 giants and some people whom she couldn't give a name to at all. At that moment, Aslan and the signs rushed back to her mind. She had forgotten all about them in the last hour. Scrub, she whispered, grabbing his arm. Scrub, Scrub, do you see anyone you know? "So you've turned up again, have you?" said Scrub disagreeably, for which he had some reason. "Well, keep quiet, can't you? I want to listen." "Don't be a fool," said Jill. "There isn't a moment to lose. Don't you see some old friend here? Because you've got to go and speak to him at once." "What are you talking about?" said Scrub. "It's Aslan the lion. Says you've got to," said Jill despairingly. "I've seen him." "Oh, you have you? What did he say?" "He said the very first person you saw in Narnia would be an old friend, and you've got to speak to him at once." "Well, there's nobody here I've ever seen in my life before, and anyway, I don't know whether this is in Narnia." "Though you said you'd been here before," said Jill. "Well, you thought wrong." "Well, I like that. You told me—" "For heaven's sake, dry up and let's hear what they're saying." The king was speaking to the dwarf, but Jill couldn't hear what he said, and as far as she could make out, the dwarf made no answer, though he nodded and wagged his head in a great deal. Then the king raised his voice and addressed the whole court, but his voice was so old and cracked that he could understand very little of his speech, especially since it was all about people and places he had never heard of. When the speech was over, the king stooped down and kissed the dwarf on both cheeks, straightened himself, raised his hand as if in blessing, and went slowly and with feeble steps up the gateway and on board the ship. The courtiers appeared to be greatly moved by his departure. Handkerchiefs were got out. Sounds of sobbing were heard in every direction. The gangway was cast off. Trumpets sounded from the poop, and the ship moved away from the quarry. From the quay? It was being towed by a rowing boat, but Jill didn't see that. "Now," said Scrub, but he didn't get any further because of that very moment a large white object, Jill thought for a second that it was a kite, came gliding through the air and alighted at his feet. It was a white owl, but so big that it stood as high as a good-sized dwarf. It blinked and peered as if it were short-sighted, and put its head a little to one side, and in a soft, hooting kind of voice, "To who are you?" "My name's Scrub, and this is Paul," said Eustace. "Would you mind telling us where we are?" "In the land of Narnia, at the king's castle of Cair Paravel." "Is that the king who's just taken ship?" Too true," said the owl sadly, shaking its big head. "But who are you? There's something magic about you two. I saw you arrive. You flew. Everyone else was so busy seeing the king off that nobody knew, except me. I happened to notice you. You flew." "We were sent here by Aslan," said Eustace in a low voice. To who?" said the owl, ruffling out its feathers. "This is almost too much for me. So early in the morning. I'm not quite myself till the sun's down." "And we've been sent to find the lost prince," said Jill, who had been anxiously waiting to get into the conversation. "It's the first I've heard of it," said Eustace. "What prince?" "You had better come and speak to the Lord Regent at once," it said. "That's him over there, in the donkey carriage. Trumpkin the dwarf, the bird." "Oh, Trumpkin the dwarf. Oh, shit, it's Trumpkin." The bird turned and began leading the way, muttering to itself, "Woo, what to do? I can't think clearly yet. It's too early." "What is the king's name?" asked Eustace. "Caspian the 10th, said the owl, and Jill wondered why Scrub had suddenly pulled up short in his walk and turned an extraordinary color. She thought she'd never seen him look so sick about anything.